Last week in class, we talked about the quadratic formula and how we can use the quadratic formula to solve for x. And what we're solving for is to find out when this equation on this side, when I plug in the value that we solve for x into this side of the equation, it's equal to 0. So we did some factoring, but sometimes you come into a situation where you don't have factors, or you can't factor this with the x factor or the pants method, so you're going to have to go ahead and use this quadratic formula. And mathematicians came up with this. We start, though, knowing that we have a quadratic in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. So at that point, when we have it in this form, then we have to identify what's my value of a, what's my value of b, what's my value of c. So in this particular case, a is 1, b is 10, and c is negative 19. So moving forward from here, I'm going to grab my calculator because you're probably going to need one of those. I'm going to start plugging it in. So my first step is I have x is equal to, and I have the opposite of b. So the opposite of 10 is negative 10. And I have plus or minus because I'm going to end up with two possible solutions. The square root of b squared, which is 10 squared, I'm going to put that in parentheses in case it's negative, minus 4 times a times c, which is going to be negative. So at this point, I start simplifying. And my calculator doesn't always simplify using the order of operations, so you're going to do one thing at a time. Oh, I forgot. And then you have 2 times 1. So in this case, I'm going to end up with a negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 10 squared is 100. And then I have negative 4 times negative 19 times 1, which is going to end up being plus 76, and I divide that by 2. So then I keep on simplifying, and I have negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 176 divided by 2. And at this stage, I don't believe that 76 I know it's not a perfect square, so I can use one of the yellow calculators that we have here in class, and I can see what the square root of 76 is. And it ends up being 4 times 19, and the square root of 4 is 2. So I can simplify this to be x is equal to negative 10 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 19 divided by 2. And then I take each term and I say, okay, x is equal to negative 5 plus or minus 2 divided by 2 is 1, so the square root of 19. So I have two different answers here. I have x is equal to negative 5 plus the square root of 19, and I have x is equal to negative 5 minus the square root of 19. And you can use your calculator to find the decimal form of that. So you continue on and you do these the exact same way. So I'm going to move on down to 5 because it's a little bit different. In this situation, I have a is equal to 2, b is equal to negative 8, and c is equal to negative 14. So it's really just a matter here of getting your math right. I plug into my formula that you can find at the top of your page. This is actually on page 24 in your packet. So if you wanted to do this along with me, you could. So I have the opposite of b, which is 8, plus or minus the square root of negative 8, or not the square root, the square of negative 8, minus 4 times 2 times negative 14 divided by 2. Now this is where it's really important for you to be able to use your calculator correctly. So I have 8 plus or minus, and the square of negative 8, or negative 8 squared, is positive 64. But you need to make sure that you're using your calculator correctly and use the parentheses function before you square it. Because if you do it the other way and you just put negative 16 squared without the parentheses, the calculator is going to end up telling you it's negative 256, which I did negative 16 squared instead of negative 8 squared. So at this point, I have to multiply negative 4 times 8, which is negative 8, and then I multiply that by 14, and it's positive 112. Then I have to take 2 times 2, which is 4. And at this stage, I just continue to simplify. I do 112 plus 64, which would be under my radical, 176, and I divide it by 4. Then you can place it into your calculator and you can try to find what the square root of 176 is. And it's going to be 4 radical 11 divided by 4. At this stage, you can simplify. You can do 8 divided by 4 is 2, so x is going to equal to 2, plus or minus 4 divided by 4 is 1, and then radical 11. Now, I think you can plug it into the yellow calculators and it'll simplify it for you, which is wonderful. So let's just take one of them. You can't do plus or minus, so I'll just 8 plus 4, and then I'll do the square root of 11. And then I need to put a parentheses around all of this, but I need to do it when it's outside of the radical. So let's go back to the front and insert a parentheses. And then I need to take this whole value and divide it by 4. And let's see. And it gives me the value of the square root of 11 plus 2. But it's also the negative square root of 11 plus 2. So it does look a little bit different on your calculator, but you can do it either way. So let's do another one. Let's do number 8 at the bottom of this page. I have a is equal to 3, b is equal to negative 21, and c is equal to negative 5. So it's always just putting it in standard form and finding your values of a, b, and c. So from this point, I just plug it in. So I do the opposite of b, plus or minus negative 21 squared minus 4 times a times c. And I'm going to divide that by 2 times 3. So it's going to be 21 plus or minus, and negative 21 squared is going to be 441. And then negative 12 times negative 5 is plus 60. And in the denominator, it's divided by 6. So x is going to equal 21 plus or minus the square root of 501 divided by 6. And at this point, I have to see what the square root of 501 is. And there is no value for the square root of 501, so that's as simple as we get. So I can leave it in this form right here and not simplify it any further. If I was to try to figure out what this is, I would just take my calculator and I would say 21 plus radical 501 and enter and divide that whole value by 6. And then I can find the decimal form, which is x is equal to 7.231. And then I take 21 minus the square root of 501. And then I divide that whole value by 6 and press enter. And so x is also equal to 0.231. Now you can take these values and plug it back into your original equation and see, does it make my equation equal to 0? And that's how you can check your answers. So if I did it with the first value, I would take 3 times 7.231, square that, minus 21 times 7.231, minus 5, and it should be about 0. And you can check on that with your calculator. So hopefully that'll help you whenever you're plugging in to solve for x using the quadratic formula.